If you ask anyone in Akinbi village about Tayo the weaver, they will tell you two things. First, that her baskets were the most beautiful anyone had ever seen. And second, that she paid the ultimate price for her gift. I was there when it all happened. Tayo wasn't just a weaver, she was an artist, someone whose fingers could twist straw and reeds into shapes that seemed to breathe. Her baskets weren't just containers, they were works of art that told stories. Some were shaped like gourds, others were adorned with patterns that mirrored the stars. And the women who bought her baskets, they carried them to markets proudly, knowing everyone would stop to admire their beauty. Tayo's skill wasn't ordinary. People said she was blessed by Orunmila, the god of wisdom and craft. Others whispered that she had been taught her skill by an old woman who lived deep in the forest, someone no one else dared to visit. Tayo herself never confirmed or denied these stories. When asked, she'd only smile and say, "My hands know what they're doing." She lived in a small hut on the edge of the village, close to the river where the best reeds grew. Every morning, just as the sun rose, you'd see her wading through the shallows, cutting the finest stalks with her sharp knife. She worked with a quiet intensity, her lips moving in silent prayer as she tied the bundles together and carried them back home. Her baskets always seemed to carry the spirit of the river itself, fluid, alive, unbroken. But there was one thing about Tayo that everyone noticed. No matter how many baskets she made, she never sold them for much. "A basket is a gift," she'd say. "It's not meant to make anyone rich." She traded them for simple things: millet, yam, dried fish. And if a family couldn't afford one, she'd often give it away for free. For years, this was how Tayo lived, modestly, quietly, and with the respect of the entire village. But then one day, everything changed. It began when a stranger arrived in Akinbi. He was a wealthy trader from the city, dressed in fine clothes and wearing sandals that gleamed as if they'd been polished with gold dust. His name was Olomide, and he had come to buy goods for his shop in Lagos. When he saw one of Tayo's baskets at the market, he was stunned. "Who made this?" he asked, holding it up. "It's Tayo's work," the seller replied. "She lives by the river." Olumide wasted no time. He found Tayo's hut and knocked loudly on her door. When she opened it, he introduced himself and held up one of her baskets. "This," he said, "is worth more than anything I've ever seen." Tayo was puzzled. "It's just a basket." Olumide laughed. "Just a basket? No, this is art. And art like this belongs in the city, where people will pay real money for it. I'll buy everything you have, and I'll pay you double what anyone else does." Tayo hesitated. "I don't weave for money," she said, but Olumide was persistent. He returned the next day and the day after that, until finally Tayo agreed. "Just one basket," she said. "Take it and leave me be." But Olumide didn't leave. When he sold that basket in the city for a fortune, he returned with even more money, begging Tayo for more. The villagers warned her not to listen. "This isn't our way," they said. "Craft is sacred. It shouldn't be used for greed." But Olumide's money was tempting. Tayo's hut was old, her clothes were worn, and she often went without meat in her meals. She thought of the new roof she could buy, the better tools she could afford, and the food she could eat if she gave in. Against her better judgment, she made another basket, and then another. And soon, Tayo was weaving not for herself, but for Olumide and his endless orders. At first, everything seemed fine. Tayo's hut grew sturdier, her clothes brighter, and her meals richer. But something about her work began to change. The reeds she wove with started to snap in her hands. Patterns that once came easily now tangled and slipped away like a forgotten song. She grew frustrated, working late into the night, muttering under her breath as she struggled to meet Olumide's demands. One evening, as she sat by the fire, a strange voice spoke from the shadows. "Tayo." She turned quickly, but there was no one there. "Tayo," the voice said again, "you have broken the promise." Tayo's heart raced. She remembered the old woman who had taught her to weave long ago. Never use this gift for greed, the woman had said. It is meant to bring harmony, not wealth. I can stop, Tayo whispered into the darkness. I'll stop. But the voice only laughed. It is too late. The next morning, Tayo woke with a strange heaviness in her hands. She tried to weave, but her fingers felt stiff, like wood. By midday, her hands had swollen so much that she could barely hold a reed. Panic set in as the swelling worsened, and she ran to the village herbalist. The herbalist shook his head gravely. This is no ordinary sickness, he said. You've angered the spirits. The only cure is to return what you've taken. But how? Tayo cried. The baskets are already gone. The herbalist had no answer. As days turned into weeks, Tayo's hands became useless. The once graceful fingers that had created beauty now hung limp and swollen at her sides. The villagers, though sympathetic, whispered behind her back. She ignored the warnings, they said. She brought this on herself. Olumide stopped coming. Without Tayo's baskets, he had no reason to stay in Akimbi. And as her hands grew worse, Tayo's life unraveled. The hut she had rebuilt began to fall apart, and the money she had earned was soon spent on failed remedies. I remember the last time I saw her. It was late in the evening, and she was sitting by the river where she used to gather reeds. Her hands were covered in sores, her face pale and gaunt. She looked up at me and said, I thought I could control it, but the gift was never mine to own. That night, Tayo disappeared. Some say she walked into the river, offering herself as an apology to the spirits. Others believe she left the village to seek forgiveness from the old woman in the forest. Whatever the truth, no one has seen her since. But to this day, when the women of Akimbi weave their baskets, they leave a small offering, a few reeds, a calabash of palm wine, by the riverbank. They say it's for Tayo, a reminder of what happens when we forget that our gifts come with responsibilities.